I thought family was my sanctuary. For decades, I poured love into celebrations, babysat grandkids, and sat through awkward holidays because I believed family mattered more than pride. Then, at a wedding celebration, surrounded by smiling faces and clinking glasses, my daughter-in-law leaned in and said something I will never forget. "The best wedding gift is if you disappear from our family." Her words landed like a punch. Shock curdled into humiliation, then a slow, cold clarity. This wasn't a joke. It was a demand. They wanted me erased. My first instinct was to leave, to vanish so the peace would return. But as her words echoed, I understood another truth. Disappearing would be the same as letting her win. So instead of shrinking, I decided to act. Quietly, I gathered evidence, watched the dynamics unfold, and set a plan in motion. What followed was a lesson in dignity, strategy, and justice. And the family who thought they could erase me learned how dangerous underestimating someone you've wounded can be. My name is Nora, and for most of my life, I thought being the family matriarch meant being the foundation everyone could lean on. I raised my children almost single-handedly after my husband passed away, pouring my time, money, and love into making sure they lacked nothing. Holidays were my territory. Thanksgiving turkeys that took 2 days to prepare, Christmas trees that glittered with handmade ornaments, and birthdays that always had a little too much cake and laughter. For years, I believed all of this built respect and loyalty. I believed it guaranteed me a permanent place in my family's heart. But looking back now, I see I was wrong. Love doesn't always protect you from betrayal, and sacrifices aren't always remembered with gratitude. My son Daniel had always been my pride. From the time he was a boy, I believed he would grow into a man who valued family above all else. When he married, I thought my family was only expanding. I would gain a daughter and eventually grandchildren who would fill my quiet home with joy again. And for a while, it seemed true. They came for dinners, holidays, even small Sunday lunches. I babysat when they needed a break. I knitted sweaters for the little ones and took joy in watching them run through my garden. These moments became the rhythm of my life, proof that my sacrifices hadn't been in vain. But even as I smiled, I began to notice shadows creeping in. It started with small things. My daughter-in-law, Claire, making comments about my cooking being too old-fashioned, or rolling her eyes when I suggested keeping certain family traditions alive. At first I ignored them, telling myself I was being sensitive. Every family has adjustments, I thought, and perhaps she simply needed time. But the more I brushed it aside, the more I felt the distance grow. Invitations to outings would never quite reach me. Plans seemed to be made without my knowledge, and her tone toward me carried a coolness I couldn't mistake. I reminded myself, you raised Daniel to be loyal. Surely he sees, surely he understands, but the silence stretched longer each time. And I began to wonder if my presence was becoming less of a joy and more of a burden. When Daniel and Claire announced they were hosting a grand wedding celebration to renew their vows, I was thrilled. It wasn't just about them. It felt like a chance to unite everyone again, to rebuild what I thought was slipping away. I baked cookies for the rehearsal dinner, offered to help with decorations, and even wore the new dress Claire had suggested. Everyone seemed excited, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe I was wrong, that all my doubts were nothing but the foolish worries of an aging mother. The invitations went out, the music was chosen, and the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. My heart swelled with hope. Little did I know that this day of joy would also be the day I would hear words that cut deeper than any knife. The wedding celebration was everything one could imagine. Lights strung across the garden, a live band playing cheerful music, tables filled with guests in their best attire. People toasted, laughed, and embraced Daniel and Claire as though they were royalty. I tried to soak in the happiness, smiling at the speeches, and clinking my glass when others raised theirs. My grandchildren tugged at my sleeves, asking me to dance, and for a while I forgot the unease I'd been carrying. Looking around at my family, I thought, this is what it's all for. This is why I've endured, why I've sacrificed. I believed for one fragile moment that love was enough to silence the shadows. But shadows, as I was about to learn, don't vanish in the light. They only grow sharper. It happened during a quiet moment. I was adjusting the flowers on the table when Claire approached me, her smile perfectly in place for the watching guests. To anyone else, she looked like a gracious hostess, glowing in her gown. But as she leaned closer, her words slipped into my ear like poison. "The best wedding gift," she said sweetly, would be if you disappeared from our family. My breath froze. I turned to her, certain I had misheard, but her eyes glimmered with a cruel certainty. Then, just as quickly, she stepped back, raising her glass and laughing with another guest as though nothing had happened. The world around me blurred. Music played, people cheered, but inside, I had been struck silent. For the rest of the evening, her words echoed in my head. Disappear, as though all my years of love, all my sacrifices were nothing but a nuisance. I excused myself early, retreating to a corner where no one would notice the tears brimming in my eyes. My son was lost in laughter, oblivious. My grandchildren twirled on the dance floor, innocent of the cruelty their mother had just unleashed. I sat there, torn between humiliation and rage. A part of me wanted to walk away and never look back, to grant her the gift she so brazenly demanded. But another part of me, the part that had built a family from the ashes of widowhood, whispered that leaving would mean surrender. And I was not a woman who surrendered. That night, after the wedding celebration, I drove home in silence. The radio hummed faintly, but I barely heard it. Claire's words clung to me like a shadow. The best wedding gift is if you disappear. I replayed every detail, the smirk in her eyes, the way she slipped effortlessly back into her role as the perfect bride in front of the crowd. The humiliation burned. For decades, I had carried this family on my back, and now I was disposable. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house I had built brick by brick with my late husband. She wanted me erased, but I wasn't about to vanish so easily. The next morning, I called Daniel. My voice was steady, but my heart trembled as I hinted at what had happened. He laughed nervously, brushing it off as just Claire's sense of humor. He insisted she didn't mean it, but the ease with which he dismissed my pain cut deeper than her insult. My son, the boy I had raised with sleepless nights and endless sacrifices, was blind to the venom in his wife's smile. Or perhaps he simply chose not to see it. Either way, I realized I couldn't count on him to protect me. I would have to protect myself. Claire's cruel words triggered memories of smaller moments I had ignored. The way she once suggested I should downsize my house since I was too old to manage it. The way she always changed the subject when I mentioned family traditions, dismissing them as outdated. Even the way she had once hidden a family heirloom necklace I had gifted my granddaughter, later claiming it was misplaced. These weren't coincidences. They were signs. A pattern of slow erasure. Claire hadn't just decided she wanted me gone at the wedding. She had been working toward it for years. And I had been too trusting to notice. I could have confronted Claire. I could have screamed, demanded apologies, or exposed her cruelty to the entire family. But something inside me told me that would only feed her power. She thrived on painting me as fragile, dramatic, or outdated. No, if I wanted to survive this, I needed a different approach. I would watch. I would listen. I would gather every piece of proof of what she truly was. Silence, I realized, could be more powerful than rage. For the first time, I wasn't just a mother or grandmother. I was a strategist. Weeks turned into months, and I began to notice just how far her influence reached. Family dinners were suddenly too busy for me to attend. Outings were planned without my knowledge. Even my grandchildren began to parrot phrases like, "Mom says you're tired, Grandma, so we didn't call." Claire's campaign was working. Subtle, but effective. She wanted me isolated, invisible. But instead of crumbling, I took note. Every text left unanswered, every invitation withheld, every snide remark disguised as a joke. I wrote it down. Piece by piece, her mask was cracking, and I was ready to show the world what lay beneath. One afternoon, Claire visited me under the guise of being helpful. She smiled sweetly and suggested I sell the house, while it still had value, and move into a smaller apartment. "It'll be easier for you, Nora," she said, her tone laced with false concern. But her eyes betrayed her, sharp, calculating. She wasn't thinking of me. She was thinking of what she could gain. My house, my possessions, my place in the family legacy. It was all in her sights. I nodded politely, hiding the storm building inside me. She thought she was winning, but she had just revealed her true motive. That night, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the deed to my house and the old family documents I had tucked away for safekeeping. I traced the signatures of my late husband and myself, remembering the years of labor and sacrifice that built this home. Claire wanted me erased, but I made a vow then and there. I would not be erased. I would protect what I had built, not just for myself, but for my grandchildren, who deserved to know their true heritage. Claire believed I was weak, that I would bow to her cruelty. She had no idea who she was up against. Every battle begins with evidence. I started writing everything down in a leather-bound journal. Dates, conversations, and small incidents that revealed Claire's disdain. When she made a snide comment about my outdated furniture, I noted it. When my son canceled dinner plans last minute because Claire wasn't feeling up to visitors, I wrote that too. Screenshots of text messages, overheard whispers, even the absence of invitations. All of it went into a quiet collection. To anyone else, it may have looked like paranoia, but I knew better. Someday, these details would matter. Claire was careful in public, but in private, her cruelty seeped through. I would make sure her mask couldn't protect her forever. I didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. His blindness to his wife's schemes cut too deep. Instead, I turned to an old friend, Linda, who had been a lawyer for decades. Over tea at her kitchen table, I laid everything out. The whispered insult, the attempts to isolate me, the subtle pushes to sell my home. Linda listened quietly, her brows furrowing. When I finished, she squeezed my hand and said firmly, "Nora, you need to protect your estate and your voice. Before they silence both." Her words settled heavy but steady in my chest. For the first time, I felt less like a victim and more like a woman preparing for war. The first step was protecting what mattered most, my home. With Linda's guidance, I reviewed every document, the deed, the insurance, the will. We updated legal protections so no one could force me out or sell behind my back. I also created a trust, ensuring that if anything happened to me, my grandchildren would benefit directly. Not Claire. It felt like pulling armor over my shoulders, one document at a time. The house wasn't just brick and wood. It was my husband's sweat, my sacrifices, my memories. I would never allow it to be stolen. Next, I moved financial accounts into secure places where only I had access. Savings, bonds, and even my pension, all separated, safeguarded. Claire might smile sweetly when she talked about simplifying things for me, but I wasn't about to let her simplify my bank account into her playground. I also started placing important heirlooms, jewelry, photographs, letters in a safety deposit box. These weren't just objects. They were pieces of history she would never twist or take. My moves were quiet, invisible to the family. To them, I was just Grandma Nora, sipping tea and knitting. To myself, I was a fortress being rebuilt. I began reaching out to relatives and old friends, strengthening bonds that had frayed over the years. Sunday lunches with cousins, phone calls with neighbors, even inviting church friends for tea. It wasn't just about companionship. It was about ensuring there were witnesses to my life, my character, my side of the story. Claire's tactic was isolation, but mine was connection. The more people I had in my corner, the harder it would be for her to erase me. Slowly, I felt the weight of loneliness lift. I wasn't alone, no matter how much she wanted me to believe otherwise. All the while, I played my role with care. At family gatherings, I smiled, laughed, and stayed pleasant. I never gave Claire the satisfaction of seeing me ruffled. When she tried her little digs, "Oh, Nora, you must be tired. Don't overexert yourself," I replied cheerfully. "Oh, I feel stronger every day." She didn't know I was watching her every move, recording her every misstep in silence. Her arrogance blinded her. She thought she was outsmarting me. In reality, she was digging her own grave. By the end of that year, I had everything I needed. Secured assets, loyal allies, and a thick folder of evidence. But I didn't want a screaming match behind closed doors. No, when the time came, I wanted the truth to be undeniable and witnessed. Claire had humiliated me in whispers, behind polite smiles. I would expose her in a way she could never escape. A family gathering was approaching, an anniversary dinner where everyone would be present. As I tucked the evidence into my handbag, I whispered to myself, "You wanted me gone, Claire. But soon, it's you who will wish you had disappeared." The anniversary dinner arrived. The house buzzed with chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the warmth of family. I dressed carefully, an elegant navy dress, pearls at my neck, my late husband's watch on my wrist, a symbol of dignity. Claire floated around the room, her laughter high-pitched, her hand clinging to Daniel's arm like a badge of victory. She was radiant, confident. She thought she had already won, that I was too weak, too outdated, too alone to matter. But as I greeted relatives and accepted hugs from grandchildren, I felt a calm fire inside me. Tonight was not just another dinner. Tonight was the moment the mask she wore so carefully would begin to crack. It didn't take long. Over appetizers, Claire leaned toward me and said with a smile sweet enough to rot teeth, "Nora, isn't it time you considered selling the cabin? It must be exhausting for you to manage at your age." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting toward me. She thought she was being clever, framing cruelty as concern. I smiled and replied, "Funny you mention that, Claire. I've been preparing for the future, too." My tone was light, but I saw her stiffen. That was the first tremor of unease. She didn't know that I had come prepared to turn her whispers into a symphony for everyone to hear. Midway through dinner, as laughter filled the room, I gently tapped my glass. "If I could have a moment," I began, my voice calm but carrying. Silence fell. I could see Claire's eyes narrow, suspicion flickering across her face. I pulled a small folder from my handbag. "This year I've been reflecting on family, on loyalty, on love." My words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Claire shifted in her seat, her smile tightening. She knew something was coming, but not what. I could almost hear her mind racing. For the first time, she wasn't in control. I laid out printed emails, text messages, and notes from my journal. "I've heard whispers," I said evenly, "that perhaps the best wedding gift I could give was to disappear, that my home is a burden, that my presence is unwelcome." A collective gasp swept the table. Claire's face flushed red, her lips parting as she tried to interject, but I continued. "I won't name names. The evidence speaks for itself." I handed the papers to Linda, who sat nearby, and asked her to read aloud. One by one, Claire's cruel words filled the air, undeniable and sharp as knives. The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire snapped, "This is ridiculous. You're twisting things, Nora. Everyone knows you're manipulative, playing the victim." Her voice cracked as she looked around desperately for support. But the faces at the table weren't nodding. They were cold, shocked, disappointed. Daniel's jaw tightened as he read the papers for himself. "Claire, did you really say this?" he whispered. She sputtered excuses, but the more she talked, the deeper she sank. The carefully curated image of the dutiful daughter-in-law shattered before everyone's eyes. Daniel rose from his chair, papers in hand. His voice trembled with a mix of fury and shame. "All this time I thought you were protecting us, but you were tearing us apart." Claire reached for him, her painted nails trembling, but he pulled away. The room felt heavy, like judgment itself hung in the air. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. Claire's power over me, over my family, evaporated in that single moment. The rest of the dinner was chaos. Claire tried to recover, offering apologies dripping with false sweetness. But no one bought them anymore. Relatives whispered. Friends avoided her gaze. She excused herself early, leaving the table in silence and shame. Daniel didn't follow her. Instead, he sat beside me, head bowed. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he murmured. I placed my hand on his, steady and forgiving. The storm had passed, but its destruction left truth laid bare. Claire wasn't the woman she pretended to be, and everyone finally saw it. The morning after the dinner, the silence in my home felt different, lighter, freer. For years, Claire's voice had echoed in my head, belittling and dismissing me. Now it was gone. The family group chat buzzed with messages of support. Cousins who had once drifted away sent words of apology. "We should have seen it, Nora. You didn't deserve that." Their voices, once distant, became a chorus of comfort. I knew the battle wasn't entirely over. Claire would try to claw her way back into favor, but the truth was already out. Her power over me was broken. Daniel came to see me 2 days later. His shoulders sagged, his eyes red-rimmed. He confessed what I had long suspected, that he'd believed Claire's lies about me being difficult, overbearing, even unstable. He wept as he admitted, "I let her turn me against my own mother." Hearing those words hurt, but they also healed. For the first time, my son saw me clearly, not as the version Claire painted, but as the woman who had raised him, loved him, and fought silently for him. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, but it was possible. Word spread quickly. Within weeks, Claire's polished image began to crack in the wider community. Friends distanced themselves, polite invitations disappeared, and whispers followed her wherever she went. She had wanted me erased, but it was she who was fading from the picture. Daniel, once her most loyal defender, grew distant. Their marriage, strained by truth, began to falter. I didn't need revenge. Life itself was handing her the consequences she had earned. Watching her isolation grow was not sweet, but it was just. With the weight lifted, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I had abandoned. I hosted Sunday lunches again, filled my home with laughter, and rejoined community groups I had once loved. My grandchildren visited more often, bringing light and noise that filled the house with joy. I realized then I had let someone else define my worth for too long. Claire had called me useless, outdated, a burden, but I was none of those things. I was a matriarch, a survivor, a woman with a story, and a voice that would not be silenced. I finalized my estate plans with Linda's help, ensuring that every asset, every heirloom, every piece of my history would go exactly where I intended. No manipulation, no loopholes. My will was ironclad, leaving no room for interference. The cabin, the jewelry, the letters, all preserved for my grandchildren and beyond. It wasn't about the money. It was about legacy, about making sure no one could ever erase me from the family tree. I slept soundly that night, knowing my story would live on, untwisted and unclaimed by anyone else. One afternoon, I gathered the photographs Claire had tried to tidy away, pictures of me and my late husband, holidays with the children, old birthday celebrations. I placed them back on the mantel where they belonged. Then, I lit a small fire in the garden and burned the scraps of notes and insults I had collected from her. The evidence had served its purpose. Now it was time to release it. As the flames consumed the paper, I whispered, "You do not own me." You never did. Smoke rose into the sky, carrying away years of pain. Standing on my porch, watching the sunset cast golden light across the yard, I felt an overwhelming peace. Claire had once told me the best gift I could give was to disappear, but I hadn't disappeared. I had endured, I had fought, and I had triumphed. My family saw me for who I truly was. My home remained mine, my dignity unbroken. He thought I'd walk away broken, I whispered to myself, echoing the strength in my heart. But I walked away free. And with that, I closed the door, not on my life, but on the chapter of betrayal that would never define me again.